Yes and no. As the former ambassador to the United States, there was a tremendous interest in Egypt initially for historical reasons, but more recently because of the topicality of the Middle East and what's happening in our region. In that sense, Egypt is looked upon as America's friend in the region, and how can you help solve our problems? The problem, however, is that occasionally when the problems get difficult, we tend to get blamed for more than our share of what's happening there. But I think the relationship is solid. I think it's diversified and well-founded, and any relationship has its ups and downs. Sure. I mean, I arrived less than 2 weeks later. I had the Egypt air crash off of New York, and that was very emotional for both sides and very difficult. And then you had the failure of the Arab-Israeli peace process after President Clinton left office. Then 9/11. Then you had Iraq, and in parallel with all that, you had the war against terrorism, which also dealt with Afghanistan. The simultaneity of these issues, all of them at the same time, really made or provided for a lot of tension between the U.S. and the Middle East. And I mean the U.S. as a people and the Middle East as a people, even though on many of those issues we actually agreed with each other. War against terrorism. We were attacked before America was. We're on the same side, shoulder to shoulder on that. We both condemned Saddam Hussein, although we differed with you on how you entered Iraq. We both want peace in the Middle East. We're the pioneers of peace in the Middle East. We've differed occasionally on how much emphasis has been put and whether or not you're providing for a balanced support for this process. So many of our objectives are the same, but they've been trying times because you have so many issues at the same time. And the attack against America on 9/11, I think, really created a tremendous trauma for America, particularly on the East Coast, America generally, but particularly on the East Coast, and with a special emphasis on the problem is in the Middle East. And therefore, where were our friends? Why didn't they help, and how can they help? If you claim, as we do, to be America's strongest friend in the Middle East, because we deal with so many issues that America is involved with, then it's expected, although probably not fair, that when there are problems between America and the Middle East, some in America will tend to blame their friends. I argue that in times of difficulty, you should depend on your friends rather than blame them, especially if we gave you the right advice on what not to do and what to do. I'm not claiming, by the way, that we don't make mistakes. I'm just arguing that when we make mistakes, they affect us and at most our region. When you make mistakes because you're a global power, they affect the world at large. So the consequences are much greater. Well, the answer is yes, on all three. It doesn't mean that we differ on all three. On the war on terrorism, we are working with you shoulder to shoulder, no hesitation whatsoever. But we urge you to be careful in how you project it publicly, so that people don't generalize this as being a war against Islam, because then you lose support. On Iraq, we were against Saddam Hussein as you were, but we urge you to get a Security Council resolution before you went in, because that's the only justification for military action, and we differed on that. On the peace process, we urge you to do it the very first year your new president came into office, because this is a difficult, tenuous problem, and it's not going to stay quiet. Now, differences happen between friends, and even though we've differed on all three of these issues, we are working with you today. We're not debating that we told you so. That's history. It's a fact, but I'm not wasting time on that. We're working with you in Iraq. We're working with you on the peace process. We're working with you on terrorism. That's what I mean in terms of the importance of this friendship. We've had our problems. The last 8 years were not easy, and we had to work through them. But I was comfortable and confident from the very beginning that we would get over this. Maybe it took a little bit longer than it should have. But the relationship is strong and it's solid. It's healthy because you are a global power with so many interests. We're a regional power with a large number of interests, but we come from different perspectives. So as long as strategically we have the same objectives, that's fine. If we were to have identical positions on every tactical step, there would be something wrong, because it can't possibly be the case. First of all, we've been discussing reform issues generally, political, social, and economic, since President Carter. This is not a new issue, but the discussion has always been private, serious, and with the realization that these things are going to take time, and they will have to develop into an Egyptian model for the Egyptian political, social, and economic system. It can't be an American model because we're not Americans. We're not living in America. Our history, heritage, and our perspective is different. Where we differed with the administration, frankly, was on 2 points. One, we abhor terrorism as much as you do, and the same people who attacked you attacked us first, by the way. If they're criminals, you need to deal with them as criminals, and then you need to solve the socio-economic problems that would dry away the support that they may or may not have in society. To simplify the whole issue of the war against terrorism and promote democracy, and that solves the issue of terrorism, is a simplification that's going to get you nowhere. Over and above that, to develop a democratic system, you need time. Your system, which is not perfect, is an excellent model for democracy, even though it's not perfect. The reason I say it's excellent is that you don't like it either. And you're trying to develop it over time, and that's what's required. We need to do that. So when you simplify the core reason for the terrorist attack against America as being the lack of democracy, that's a simplification that frankly is unjustified. Just go back to I know many of my friends in America don't like history very much, but if you just go back to 60s and 70s and 80s and 60s and 70s, in particular to Europe, Baader-Meinhof in Germany, Red Brigade in Italy, even in Asia, in the Saram attack in Japan, they weren't from non-democratic countries. They weren't from Muslim countries. They weren't from Arab countries. They weren't from poor countries, but they were terrorists. I'm not defending our terrorists. I did not claim that 9/11 came from America. These were Middle Eastern terrorists. We have to solve our problems, but let's solve them seriously rather than simply trying to put the blame. The second problem really is, even when we differ with each other, because we're friends, because we have strategic interests, the essence of the debate should be private. And I give the example of Iraq. When we differed with you on Iraq, we told you privately it's wrong. We told you a couple of times publicly it's wrong, but we didn't berate you every day that you're digging a hole there that's going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And there was a point in time when we decided, well, yes, we told our friends in America, but it's time to work with our friends in America. That's what we expected from Americans in terms of the issue of reform. Even if you really think you need to address this publicly once or twice, we may not like it, but we'll deal with you as a friend. But to think that you can solve this simply by scoring points and saying, well, Egypt has this problem or that, it's not going to help, frankly. And I would be careful also, because you need your friends in times of difficulty rather than pushing them away. Look, we're in a process of transition and change. And consequently, there has to be some, for lack of a better word, turmoil or some friction between tradition and the future. Let me give you a very simple example. As a very young student, I learned Fortran 4, which is the first computer programming language. I have no idea where computers are going today in the future. I sit with my kids and they talk about opportunities and possibilities that I can't even visualize. Egypt is a country with a long history, which tends to be stable and centralized. We live on 5% of our land for 7,000 years. And we're going through a demographic transition, first of all. 56% of our population is 25 or younger. This is what's pushing reform and change in Egypt. Secondly, we're part of the global village where we're all interconnected. Information travels by lightning speed from one, or actually it's nanoseconds now, not lightning speed, from one part to the other. So we're in an environment that is really pushing change. That's affecting our politics, our social values, our economics. It's being pushed mostly by Egyptians from within, and then by this influx of information. The process is very helpful and very healthy, but it's not always easy, because it's not always 100% correct. And at the same time, I'm supposed to go through this transition, allow for all these forces of change and the risk that involves in that. At the same time, I have to create 750,000 new jobs for Egyptians every year because of my population growth, which means I need to increase domestic and foreign investment. Domestic and foreign investment wants stability. Most of all, they want to have good business practices, good economic policies, but they want to know if they're going to put in several $100 million or 700 million pounds into factories here in Egypt today, that this will continue to be a stable environment 3, 4, 5 years from now. So it's a delicate balance. We need to push change, we as Egyptians, change and reform robustly. We need to do that in a wise, considered manner to make sure that the main priority we have, and these are not mutually exclusive events, the main priority we have, creating jobs, continues to exist. We, as we talk, have just witnessed the financial crisis that exists. You in America didn't visualize this, nor of course did we expect it. It's going to have an effect on your economy and ours. You have to factor in these risk factors as we do the transformation. Again, I'm not arguing. Let's not change. This is not an option that Egypt has anymore. Our own population are pushing for it. But we have to do it and move it forward ourselves. We have hit about 620, 630,000 new jobs, real new jobs, last year, growing at 7% a year, 7.2% a year last year. That being said, it's not distributed in a manner that's comfortable for everybody. Needless to say, the more affluent, the more well-trained are getting more benefit out of this than the lower income sector of our society, and we need to solve those problems. As we go through this financial crisis globally, we have to find a way to continue to develop our economy. Our financial sector is in a reasonably good state because we're not leveraged heavily internationally. But needless to say, the economic environment globally will affect our developmental plans. And that's, frankly, our main priority. I need, in Egypt, to create jobs as I also transform the economy into a more modern, more open, and more interactive society. I arrived in the United States in October '99. If I simply took the figures of 2000, 2001 until the day I left in September 2008, we had increased Egyptian exports to the US 367%. Not all of it, but a good part of it were for things like QIZ and also the increased investment from the US into Egypt, very significantly, particularly over the last 5 years. A large part of that was not only in oil, where it's always been, and energy products, but also in the smart village and the IT sector. The IT sector was growing over the last 2 years at 20%, even though the economy was growing at 7%. I had the honor of taking President Mubarak to Northern Virginia in 2000, 2001. And both my American hosts and a lot of the Egyptians were wondering why in the world Egyptians would go to Northern Virginia. We go to the White House and to Congress up the hill and discuss peace process and stuff. But we were looking at the future. That's where our future is. The average age of employees at the Smart Village, which I visited just recently for the first time, is 28 years old. 28 years old in Egyptian terms it's at the point of conception, really. So, and I'm very proud of that. Look at these kids speaking on these call centers in 4 or 5 different languages. But we need to do more. And I need to do it all over Egypt, not only in Cairo and Alexandria and the big cities. People in the south, in Asyut, in Sohag, wherever we are, they need to feel the benefit of this economy, of the development. The U.S. is I think, the second largest investor in Egypt, foreign investor in Egypt, almost competing with the EU as a group, but it's the second largest. I think the UK may be the largest investor in Egypt at the time. It's still not enough, though, because of the size of your economy. On tourism, you're lagging considerably. You tend to be more affected in foreign travel by political events, and the Middle East has been on a bit of a boil the last couple of years, so you haven't come. Although foreign tourists to Egypt during the same period I mentioned increased from 3 million to 9 million. A lot of Asian tourists, a lot of European tourists. So I look forward to many, many more years of a strong relationship with the U.S. You are, as I said, a global country. You will continue to have tremendous influence worldwide. We are a country of tremendous influence regionally. Therefore, we will bump into each other on an international level, and we will work together regionally, even if we differ. And I, frankly, encourage us to differ on some occasions, because bringing out the details of the relationship rather than simply pushing them forward, I think is an important reflection of how strong our friendship really is. All the world looks at America and thinks America's Hollywood, which is partially true, because that's what perception is reality. That's what you project abroad. The only people who really understand America are those who go and visit. And I've always encouraged my visitors, take a plane from east to west in America during the day, not at night. First, you'll get bored because it's so big, and that's the first lesson. This is a continent. It's not a country. It's a continent, and therefore you will see diversity. Then stop off in New Mexico, stop off in San Francisco, stop off in Las Vegas, stop off in New York. It's almost different worlds in each one of these. You don't do enough about projecting who you really are abroad, because you've left this mostly to commercial enterprises. At a certain point in time, you close down most of your cultural centers worldwide. But that being said, you mentioned AUC. I'm an AUC graduate. My wife is an AUC graduate. My daughter is an AUC graduate. Before I left AUC, I remember talking with the former president and at least my advisor at AUC, and I said, look, the old campus, which is in Tahrir Square, isn't enough for us. For AUC really to attract strong teachers, bring in people who want to come to AUC, need not have to go to AUC. You need to have a new campus. You need to expand. People need to see where we can grow. And David Arnold, the president of AUC, day after I arrived here from Washington, after finishing my post, invited me to visit, because I've been doing some working for them, holding events for them in Washington when I was there. And I was almost in tears in seeing the university. It's a tremendous achievement. Now, we've put the bricks and the cement. You have tough competition here. Bricks and cement we have in the pyramids. The next step for AUC is to bring in those smart teachers and to bring in the new ideas. And you'll really have a tremendous audience in Egyptian students. So that's where America needs to work. And you really need to, if I can use this as a platform, frankly, you need to bring in smart teachers, smart speakers to come in and discuss with Egyptians, not only at AUC, in different professional clubs and societies and associations. And you also need to invite Americans to come here. And I've been walking the streets of Cairo since I've come, and I see foreigners and Americans just walking among Egyptians. They will find it curious, but they would also find New York curious. This is a New York in Arabic, or a Tokyo in Arabic if you want. But you also need to invite foreigners to visit America. It's a wonderful experience for the foreigners, and it's an imperative for Americans to understand what foreigners are like. One last point on this. I had a wonderful tour in the States, and I gave a lot of speeches. The most interesting and difficult question I used to get after spending a long time on peace process issues would be from an American saying, well, who are you? Or are you like them in your region? Are you simply a dressed up version of a spin machine? America is a global power. You can't afford isolationism. Not for our sake, but for your own economy, for your own security. So you need to understand what's out there. Foreign policy is not pursued in America except as a domestic issue. In terms of threat, who do we have to fight today? What's the enemy today? It has to be looked at as an investment in the future, the way your business works. Your business community understands the meaning global. If I can say, the political system doesn't yet project itself in that manner. And for Americans to pay taxes for dealing with maladies in a small city, a small country like in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, without naming it, because that malady can become an epidemic, they would have to understand the importance of foreign policy to pay out that amount of money. There's no symmetrical enemy for America, and there will not be one for the next generation, at least 10, 15 years. So you need to deal with it differently. We consider ourselves, I think correctly, to be the pioneers in the Middle East and the most influential Arab country. Doesn't mean we're better or worse, but we have been there long enough and we've engaged in all these issues. It serves our national interest to engage the Iraqi people, to deal with the problem that they have and move on to build Iraq into a unified Iraq. Not having a strong Arab presence there is detrimental to our own national interest, and it's detrimental to Iraq's interest. And just because we differed on how this problem started isn't enough of a reason, nor does it allow us to ignore our national interests. We will continue to expand our presence in Iraq because it serves us well, and if it serves America, fine. That's not a problem at all for us. That's not a reason to back off. But the problems on the ground are still complicated and still difficult. So we're not, and we can't, frankly, ignore the fact that we had an ambassador who was killed there, and consequently the risk of any of our diplomats, again, being in harm's way is tremendous, and it would be politically very difficult for people to accept here. But we will work with the Iraqis. It's time to move on. Yes and no. I mean, look, when we started the October War, nobody believed that we would start. We didn't wait for people to say, okay, we believe in you, let's do this. The result was, for America, for example, the Soviet Union left the Middle East gradually, and you became very engaged in it. And for us, Palestinians and Israelis, we started a peace process that had the Egyptian-Israeli peace and then the Palestinian, Jordan-Israel, and the Oslo process with the Palestinians. If you're going to be the leader in the region, you have to be able to lead your people. It means occasionally breaking new ground, occasionally taking risks, taking criticism as it comes along. If you define or judge a country, you can't judge it on a 2 or 4 year basis, whether you agree or not, or on one mistake or one achievement. You look at the long term, and I don't think there's any country in the Middle East that can stand up to our achievements in the Middle East. But yes, we face difficult times. The Arab-Israeli peace process was not easy. The first war against Saddam when he went into Kuwait, when we again fought with America, that was not easy to sell to our people or to sell to other Arabs. The war against terrorism has been a very difficult situation because we support the war against terrorism, although we would do some things a bit differently. But again, we're 7,000 years old. There are a couple of bumps on the road there and a couple of scars, but we're proud of our achievements.